Hey all you cool cats and kittens. My name's Brittany. Alright, in this video I'm going to be talking about how I completed this. There are probably a few last minute touches that I might do before I actually wear it out. Right now I've just been wearing it around the house because why would I not? I'm stuck inside anyway. So I'm going to be talking about this, and then at the end I'll kind of go a little more in depth on how it turned out. I used burlap and black felt. I started by cutting out the patterns that I made previously in the correct fabric. And then I used an overstitch on my sewing machine to go over the edges on every piece of burlap since it's very likely to fray. I started sewing the pieces together at the snout with the two front pieces, and then the nose piece, and then the top of the snout. Next, I marked the darts on the side of the face pieces and then sewed them. Then I took the side face pieces and attached them to the top of the snout piece. Throughout all of the sewing, I would constantly put the piece on and off of the head to make sure that everything fit correctly. In order for the piece to actually lay flat, I then flipped it inside out, laid all of the edges flat, and then sewed them down by hand. I did this for all of the inside edges. To mimic the stitching on the one from the movie, I took a different color thread and then just sewed over all of the seams to make it look hand-stitched. Next, I used some black felt to cut out the front of the snout contour pieces, and then I used that same thread to do the stitching on here. Part of this was to actually sew the piece on, and then part of it was just for show. Next, I started covering the base of this piece with excess burlap fabric. At this point, I attached the fabric of the head to the actual frame of the head. I did this a little bit at a time, adjusting everywhere where I needed, making sure things were attached properly, and really trying to make sure that I got all of the contours and nooks and crannies of the face. I used broom bristles for the whiskers, which I then colored in with Sharpie. I actually ended up using bigger bristles. Once I attached these, I realized they were way too small, so these are slightly bigger ones that I ended up using, and then I just glued them on and stuck them into the snout. Make sure to glue down all the ends as well. I pinned the edges of the snout together to give it a more rounded look and then glued down the edges. I then used black felt to finish off the edge of this, using a little bit of glue and then also using the same orange thread from before to do the contrast stitching. More black felt was used to cover up the bottom of the snout. For the teeth, I used some scrap fabric and then created a cone shape, which I then stuffed with polyfill and then sewed the top shut. To match how the teeth looked in the movie, I used hot glue and some white embroidery thread and wrapped the tooth completely with the thread. Next, I used hot glue to glue the teeth into place. To cover the sides of the base, I used more black felt and followed a line that went along with the edge of the side of the face. I then partially sewed, partially glued that on, again with that contrast stitching.
created an eye shape pattern that I knew would fit into the space that I had created and cut that out in pieces of black felt. Contrast color again to make it look handmade, and then attach the eyes that I had purchased to the pieces of felt. To attach the eyepieces, I used a knitting needle to make a pilot hole and then hot glued them into place. Next, I took more burlap, making sure to overstitch on that so it doesn't fray, and then use that to cover the back of the head. For the ears, I sketched out the shape that I wanted them to be, and then cut out the pattern. I used a dark brown fabric for the inside of the ear, and then again used the contrast stitching seen throughout. Making the outer part of the ear was a challenge for me, so I ended up making pretty much a tube that I then stuffed with polyfill and used some pipe cleaners for a little bit of structure. I then wrapped it in burlap and then folded it into shape. After that, I glued it onto the inner ear pieces, and that was pretty much how I got some ears. Moving on to the mane, I took a bunch of fabric in different colors of red and yellow, orange, browns, and cut it into strips. I then took one long strip and sewed the tiny strips onto it, making like a fringe. I made a bunch of these strips to be sewed onto the burlap for the mane. Before attaching the mane, I wanted to build some structure, so then there was a bit of volume on the mane, so I used some wire and hot glue to make a frame for the mane to lay on.
So I don't normally do this type of thing, but this next part is causing me a lot of stress and I'm not entirely sure the best way to do it, so I'm going to kind of talk through in real time what my plan is. So I had previously planned on attaching all of the ribbon directly to this, but it would fall too flat and just kind of look like weird hair, and I didn't want that because lions have big manes and they're really impressive. So then I added in this wire to kind of stick it out, and then I was going to kind of attach it like this and have it hang over, but then I thought you'd be able to see the wire. So now, hopefully, we'll see if it works, is I have this wire structure, and then I'm going to actually take more of the burlap fabric that I have and then do a second drape layer that hangs over it, like, pretend this is burlap. I'll drape it like this, so then it kind of has more of the volume that sticks out, and then I'm gonna sew the ribbon strips directly onto this, so then it doesn't take as long. Originally I was also gonna hand sew every piece, and that. So I'm gonna do that. We're gonna see how it goes. Yeah.
Okay, so for the second layer, I pinned it into place to see where I wanted it and then marked the edges so I knew exactly where to put it once everything was attached. And then took the strips of fabric that I had made previously and sewed them on to where when it was held upright they would flip over and dangle. After all the ribbon was sewed on, I used some yarn and ribbon and other materials to fill out the mane. For the yarn, I pretty much used a latch hook method and just attached some pieces here or there and brushed out the yarn to make it more fringy. I used hot glue to attach different types of gold ribbon throughout the mane as well. Once the mane was complete, I then hot glued it onto the top of the head following the markings I made earlier. I made sure to use a lot of hot glue here, and then I actually went completely over the seam again to make sure that it was locked in place. I also actually attached the burlap directly to the wireframe as well. Next, using some wire as dowels, I then attached the ears using hot glue. Using that same wire, I made earrings to match the ones seen in the movie. To cover up the base of the ears where it was attached, I just glued some of the ribbon into place to cover up the bottom. Next, I took some triangles that I had ironed a fold into and glued those onto the edge to cover up the seam that I had made when gluing the mane on. For the chin strap, I took some spare ribbon that I already made, cleaned up the edge, and then folded it in half to make it double-sided. Next, after lining it up, I sewed both sides of chin strap into place, starting just at the base of the face, and then sewing down the side of the hat. At this point, I tried it on to see where I wanted the Velcro pieces to be in order to fit my face. Then I sewed the Velcro on.
Alright, so I wanted to dive into this a little more in depth and outside of the walkthrough because that can be kind of rushed and boring because it's just time-lapse footage. Anyway, so a couple things that I wanted to call out. I have a link to the Etsy shop that I got the eyes from. The seller has like a million different colors of like brown and blue and green and all that stuff. So really good resource if you're looking for eyes. I probably could have went up a size, but I was worried that they weren't going to fit, so I decided to go for a smaller size. I may or may not end up adding more to the mane. Let me turn this around. This has quite a bit in it already. I feel like I have some other options. I have more like spare burlap that I could add in or different types of yarn, but I didn't want to go too over the top from the get-go. I may need to, before leading up to the actual event, reinforce the wire underneath here because it is kind of, the weight of the mane is so heavy that it is kind of weighing it down. So I might actually go in and do a little bit more underneath here because I would like it to kind of be a bit bigger and more full. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. Yeah, let me know what you think.